Hello everybody, this is Justin with Shock Therapy, and we are here to show you how to install a spring kit for the Can-Am Maverick Sport XRC as well as other models. This spring kit is going to do multiple things for you. Number one, it's going to plushion up the ride and stop the skateboard rock hard ride quality that's prevalent in the car factory. It's also going to let you jump the car flat and level as well as not feel any of the hard rough terrain. When ordering this spring kit, make sure that you specify all of the things that you're going to be doing with your car so that we can specifically give you the spring kit that is tailored for your use. As always, our spring kits are made in the USA and they are warranted for life. Unlike the factory springs, which will settle over time, our springs will settle once and then maintain their ride height throughout the life of the spring. This spring kit installation should take you about 2 to 3 hours. So let's turn this over to Mitch and have him show us how to install this spring kit.
What's going on, guys? It's Mitch. We're back at it again today. Today we're going to show you how to install the dual rate spring kit on the Can-Am Maverick XRC.
First step is to jack up the car to where the tires are just off the ground. Always use jack stands for safety. Remove one shock off the front of the car at a time. These are side specific, so make sure that the same shock stays on the same side. With the shock in the vise, lower the bump stop down the shock shaft about 3 inches, which will allow you to remove the lower spring perch. Once the spring perch is removed, you can remove the factory spring package. Make sure that the spring divider, which is plastic, stays on the shock preload nut. Loosen the preload collars and adjust them to 3 inches of preload measured from the bridge of the shock.
3 inches.
Next, install the crossover rings with the flat sides facing each other and the recessed grooves facing the top and bottom of the shock. Adjust the crossovers to 7 inches from the bridge to the bottom of the lowest crossover.
7.
Once you have your settings in place, tighten the crossover and tighten the preload collars. Install the silent O-ring all the way into the crossover ring. Install the upper spring first. Make sure that the logo and part number are faced right side up. Next, install the spring divider with the long end facing the bottom of the shock. Now, install the lower spring. Make sure that the ends of the springs, top and bottom, are touching the plastic divider on opposite sides. Compress the spring system and install the lower spring perch. Install the shock back on the car, starting with the upper hardware first. Install the lower hardware, but make sure that all the hardware is left loose. This will help you later in the installation if you need to make any ride height adjustments. Repeat the steps on the opposite front shock. With both shocks on the front of the car, you can remove the jack stands and drop the car back onto the ground. Jack the back of the car up to where the tires are just off the ground using jack stands for safety at all times. Remove one shock at a time, making sure that it goes back onto the same side of the car. With the shock in the vise, lower the bump stop down the shock shaft 2 to 3 inches, giving you clearance to remove the lower spring perch. With the spring perch out of the way, you can remove the factory spring. Next, loosen the factory preload collars. Set the preload collars to 1 3/4 inches, measured from the bridge to the bottom of the preload collar. Install the crossover rings with the flat sides touching each other and the recessed side facing the top and bottom of the shock. Set the preload collars to 5 inches from the bridge to the bottom of the preload collar.
1 3/4 and 5.
Tighten the preload collars and crossover rings at this time. Install the silent O-ring into the groove of the bottom of the crossover rings. Install the upper spring first, making sure that the part numbers are facing right side up. Install the spring divider with the long end facing the bottom of the shock. Install the lower spring, making sure that the ends of the springs are touching the plastic divider on opposite sides. Compress the spring package and install the lower spring perch. Install the shock back on the vehicle, starting with the upper hardware first. Make sure that you leave the hardware loose, as this will make adjusting ride heights easier later in the process. Repeat steps on the opposite side of the rear of the car. With both rear shocks on the car, remove the jack stands and lower it back on the ground. Enlist the help of your best friend to drive the car around while you measure ride heights. You must settle the suspension. You cannot do this by jumping up and down on the car. It must be driven around the block or at least forward and backward multiple times. The last time that you move the car, come to a stop without using the brakes. With the driver remaining in the car, measure your ground clearance. This is measured from the ground up to the lower control arm mount at the bottom of the chassis. The front of the car should measure 14 inches of ground clearance. In the rear, measure from the ground to the bottom of the frame in the center of the chassis. This ground clearance should measure 13.5 inches. At this point, if you have to make adjustments in ride height, remove the shocks and put them back in the spring compressor to adjust the preload collar. This is much easier than doing it on the car. Lower the preload collar to raise the vehicle. Raise the preload collar to lower the vehicle. Once your ride heights are maintained, then go ahead and measure your crossover heights to finalize the installation. The front shocks should have 2 inches of gap measured from the bottom of the crossover ring to the top of the plastic spring divider. The rear shocks should have 2 to 2.25 inches of gap from the bottom of the crossover to the top of the black spring divider. With ride heights set perfectly and crossover heights checked, you can now tighten all of the shock hardware. With all the hardware tightened, your installation is now complete.
Mitch, thank you for showing us how to install that spring kit, and hopefully your installation goes as easy as Mitch made it look. Some of the things that you should keep in mind with your spring kit is to adjust the ride height once it's settled in. Our springs are always brand new, so in the first 200 to 300 miles, they're going to take a set. We want you to measure your ride height and adjust accordingly. After this point, it will maintain that ride height for the life of the spring. Another thing to consider is that as you add accessories to your car, most people don't remember all the things that they put on it. More accessories means the car is going to ride lower, and you need to raise the car back up to the settings that we recommend. If you appreciate the ride quality that our spring kit gives you, then you should look into our RIS or ride improvement system for this car. The shock modifications internally will give you double the improvement that the spring kit gives you in ride quality. As always, if you're looking for more products that we offer, go to our website at shocktherapist.com, or for any technical questions, give us a call at 623-217-4959.
This guy? Who brought this kid? It's my son.
We'll go chase it.
You want me to fire away right now? What's going on? Today we about to do a Izzy on the Can-Am
Hizzy.
XR Maverick Sport Sizzy.
Sissy. Can-Am Maverick Sport XRC Spring Kit. That's what we're doing today. That's a pretty good install. And intro. I meant to say intro, not install.
He bangs in his white tee all day, putting dual rate spring in his white tee.
That's pretty good.
Now his favorite part, the top nut. Holt, who goes there? You are under arrest for being a sexy son of a dad.